words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. Every year around this time, I recall an Easter morning 40 years ago. Growing up in Oklahoma, my family attended a tiny Catholic mission church, barely bigger than our chapel here at Grace. And the Easter Sunday I have in mind began at 9 o'clock in the morning. I still remember the occasion vividly. It was one of those warm spring days when everything feels lively and new, and the breeze blows fresh and gentle. We left the door open in the back of the church, through which birdsong and sunshine poured into the sacred space. Father Michael Vaught, my favorite priest in part because he also was a big Star Wars fan, read the gospel. And just as he was about to transition into his homily, he paused. After a couple beats, he began to chant in Latin and completely from memory. He went on for quite a while, and I was captivated. Looking back, I can only assume he chanted the Exsultet, the hymn traditionally sung during the Easter Vigil the night before. Some of the words could equally apply to Easter morning. Be glad. Let earth be glad. As glory floods her, ablaze with light from her eternal King, let all corners of the earth be glad, knowing an end to gloom and darkness. Perfectly appropriate for an Oklahoma Easter morning so long ago. Why do I share this memory? Because this evening we begin the Triduum, a three-part drama, dripping with the symbolic and the sacramental, where, as Richard Rohr writes, the visible and tactile are the primary doorway to the invisible. This night especially is rich in meaning. So much happens. Judas betrays Jesus. Jesus agonizes in the garden and is ultimately arrested and swept away to begin his passion. Something we'll see dramatically reenacted right here later this evening. But for many of us, I suspect Maundy Thursday mostly calls to mind the Last Supper and the washing of the disciples' feet, an act we traditionally commemorate on this night. Now, some of you may be aware that my friend and brother Todd Ray and I are in formation for ordination to the diaconate. Todd, a year ahead of me, will be ordained in June, and I, God willing, will follow him a year later. During my studies at BKSM this last year, it has occurred to me on more than one occasion that within Maundy Thursday, we see the ordained ministries of both the priesthood and the diaconate acted out, with Jesus as the icon of each. During the Last Supper, Jesus is priest as he celebrates and institutes the Holy Eucharist. And stripped to the waist, and pouring water from a pitcher, he is deacon as he washes his disciples' feet. An act tied to the mandate for which Maundy Thursday is named, that we love one another as he has loved us. That love, according to Jesus, manifests as service. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. Service is fundamental to diaconal ministry. Deacons are called to a special ministry of servanthood with Jesus as our model. The deacon's role is so defined by humble service that Ignatius, the 2nd century bishop and martyr of Antioch, wrote that the bishop symbolically represents God, priests represent the college of the apostles, and deacons represent Jesus Christ himself. That's why the deacon is said to have one foot in the church and one foot in the world. Deacons are meant to move and be visible in the world. But they aren't the only ones. Our tradition's 4th order of ministry is laos, the laity, of which we are all members by virtue of our baptism. In fact, you could say baptism is our lay ordination. During diaconal ordination, the candidate promises to look for Christ in all others, being ready to help and serve those in need. He or she agrees to interpret to the church those needs, as well as the concerns and hopes of the world. The deacon is called to show Christ's people that in serving the helpless, they are serving Christ himself. If this sounds like Discipleship 101, it is. We say in our baptismal vows that we will, with God's help, seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving our neighbor as ourselves. Looking for and serving Christ in all persons is language unique to both the baptismal and the deacon's ordination rites. You don't see it in the rites of ordination for bishops and priests. That, to me, indicates a special relationship between the lay and diaconal orders. It's symbiotic. The deacon serves as a bridge between the church and the world, the mission field in which both deacons and laity serve. Deacon and author Ormond Plater says that as distinct symbols of Christ the servant, deacons function among the faithful as special models of common Christian service who lead, enable, and encourage other Christians in charitable service. In other words, deacons are our scouts in the world who return and report what they've seen. They are our prophets who identify and call out the injustice, pain, and human need in the world. Then they rouse the community, sharing what they know, to exhort, empower, and inspire us to faithfulness to our baptismal vow, to seek and serve Christ in all persons. The deacon says, "Look what I've seen. Listen to what I've found." And the laity responds, "Let us go forth together to serve." We've heard for years now how our denomination and other mainline traditions are shrinking. As it turns out, we're not the only ones. Even more conservative denominations are losing numbers as people seek meaning and purpose elsewhere in the world. Sociologists and church demographers have identified multiple explanations for this loss. Lack of relevance to people's lives, disparities between Christian teachings and Christian actions, scandals in various denominations, etc. We could go on. And for years, denominations, including our own, have tried to find ways to stem the outgoing tide. How do we fill the pews? How do we regain relevance? How do we grow our congregations? How do we remain viable? These are all important questions, worthy of answers, and we should continue asking them. But to me, they seem overly self-focused. What we do here is important. It isn't church, where we strengthen the bonds of community and share in sacramental life. Here we rest, recover, and acquire spiritual strength to live and move and serve in the world. Yet, as much as these church walls shelter this sacred space, as much as they nurture and provide spiritual solace to we who rest within, they also obscure. They hinder our view to the horizon. From inside these walls, we cannot see the suffering on the other side of the street. To do so, we must leave this building and go outside to the lawn. Or better yet, cross the street. Or even better, enter into that suffering space. I am convinced that the church and the world need deacons more than ever, and by extension, an empowered and vitalized laity. The world can no longer afford our preoccupation with ourselves. There's too much pain, too much fear, too much hopelessness. The church right now needs a host of deacons, empowering, supporting, and working alongside a host of laypersons to go forth into the world to serve Christ in all persons, regardless of race, national origin, sexual preference, social status, or even religious belief. Ours is not to ask whether they deserve it. Their humanity alone makes them worthy of our concern. Our duty as disciples of Jesus is simply to serve. If a human being hurts, if a human being asks for help, if a human being stumbles and falls to the ground, we must be there to comfort, to warm, to console, to heal. Because that person is our sister or brother, simply by virtue of being human. And that makes them Christ. This is what Maundy Thursday is about. We must reorient our gaze outward. We must be more present to the planet, visible within our communities, and available to those suffering outside these walls. The world has grown weary of we who claim love for Christ, yet who ignore him in our midst. If anything, this pandemic has taught us that there is more to being a church than gathering in a building every Sunday. As holy and necessary as that is, we cannot lay claim to the moral comfort of our pews so long as the world sits in misery. Church is where we find rest and strength before we go back into the world to fill the mandate of Maundy Thursday, to serve Christ in all persons, loving as he loves us. Richard Rohr, in his book, The Universal Christ, points out something I've never caught before. He says, have you ever noticed that the expression, the light of the world, is used to describe the Christ, but that Jesus also applies the same phrase to us? Apparently, light is less something you see directly and more something by which you see all other things. So light is not something simply to behold, it is the means by which we see. It illumines. Rohr continues, a mature Christian sees Christ in everything and everyone else. That is a definition that will never fail you, always demand more of you, and give you no reasons to fight, exclude, or reject anyone. Isn't that ironic, Rohr says? The point of the Christian life is not to distinguish oneself from the ungodly, but to stand in radical solidarity with everyone and everything else. We are called to stand in radical solidarity with the outcast, the marginalized, the unworthy, the forgotten, and the disposable. Jesus, as the light of the world, shines upon them and illumines them so we, the church, can see them. Then you and I, as the light of the world, shine upon them and illumine them so the world cannot ignore or forget them. But to behold both the light and to illumine the darkness, we must dare to shine outside these walls. At the very least, we must throw open wide the back door and let the breeze, the bird song, and the sunlight pour in. This is what the church needs now. This is what the world needs now. Amen.